With a continually blooming following of botanical and art lovers alike, her teaching has received worldwide attention with her online and in-person painting courses and art retreats, and her monthly live Zoom teaching sessions with the Flower Painting Club, which y'all should totally check out if you enjoy this tonight. Her books include Modern Watercolor Botanicals, the Plant Lady Coloring Book, and Watercolor Workbook. Day to day, you can find Sarah painting and sharing creativity on her Instagram at The Mint Gardener and hosting exciting events for an online community of painting lovers worldwide. And moderating this evening's conversation, Spanish-born journalist, illustrator, and author Gabi Campanario is best known for his storytelling sketches of the Seattle area, which appeared weekly in the Seattle Times between 2009 and 2021, and for his role as the founder of Urban Sketchers, a global organization of artists who aim to show the world one drawing at a time through on-location sketching and reportage. He's the author of Seattle Sketcher and Illustrated Journal and The Art of Urban Sketching, Drawing on Location Around the World. In 2022, Campanario launched Sketcher Press, which is a publishing imprint to amplify the work of urban sketchers and reportage artists. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our presenters this evening.
Thank you. Welcome again. I am Sarah Simon. These are my books, and it feels pretty surreal to get to stand up here and say that and do this. So thank you guys so much for coming and taking your moments to spend with us. And Gabby and I just met, and I am a huge fan of his work and his urban sketching work, so much so that I actually brought my sketchbooks, and we can always go through those too.
We'll have to take a look at those. Okay. Start.
Oh, it's no, that's why.
Okay.
That would be the little trick.
That's good.
Now, okay.
That makes it so much easier.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah. I am delighted to be here and learn more about your book and your work and everything behind the Mint Gardener. So I think you're going to start us out with a demonstration.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's just go. Let's go for that.
Dive right in. Okay, awesome. So this is my most recent watercolor workbook, and these books are unique. This is my second one of the watercolor workbook series. My first one was Modern Watercolor Botanical, and it's kind of an encyclopedia on everything watercolor. And then while my publisher was editing that one, I submitted the manuscript. And after you work on a book for a while, and then all of a sudden you submit it, you're kind of left with this gaping hole. You feel like, well, what do I do with my day now? And so they go, well, why don't you make a coloring book? So that's what I did. So that was the first two. And then I noticed as I was teaching different classes and different people, how much more confident people felt when there was some sort of drawing structure beneath their watercolor. People can sit down and draw, or they can sit down and watercolor, but really having that structure already there drawn on the watercolor page, it invites both the novice that is unsure with their drawing skills, or even the experienced person that's like, I don't know what I want to paint today. I know that creativity gives me life and I want to paint something, but I don't know what I want to paint. And so that was the intention of these books, is to provide a framework, truly a workbook. Everyone is worried they're going to mess up their page, which, welcome to art, everyone's worried they're going to mess up. But the secret is, if you're not messing up quite regularly, then you're never going to create good art. So you just got to create crap for a long time, and then it slowly starts to come out, right? But this was from a class that I just did this past Sunday. It was a Zoom online class, and I figured I would just, sorry, I have to make room for the book. Okay, I figured I would just keep going and kind of show you guys, demonstrate. So how many of you have watercolored before? All right, decent amount of you. Okay, a little bit. So you know that a lot of the work with watercolor actually begins on your palette before you ever get paint on your paper. So I had to wear my UW shirt because I am alum, and I was not an art major at the U. I was actually an economics major. So I came at art. My mom and my grandmother are very talented artists, and I came to art with a passion and a love for it, but not a huge education on it. So as I was experimenting and playing with watercolor, I was seeking ways to understand all of the different foundational techniques. And I actually went to the grocery store as I was writing the books, my first one especially, trying to figure out analogies that made sense. And food is kind of a universal analogy. Most people really love to eat, right? We all enjoy it. We're in Seattle. It's kind of one of our things, right? So I tried out a bunch of different sauces to try to see if the analogy, so I could communicate this paint to water ratio that was so important to get going on your palette to convert it onto paper. And so I ruined a few brushes, but I learned that if you mix up a great mixture of soy sauce with a touch of wasabi on your palette, it's a fabulous mixture to paint with. Okay, so I'm using my water, which would be my soy sauce in the analogy, and wasabi. If you have had too much wasabi in a soy sauce mixture, you often don't do it again very quickly, right? It's a lot of ears popping, eyes watering. You don't get the same effect with watercolor if you use too much paint, but you do get an oversaturated look. So about 80% water, 20% paint. If you treat your paint as that really concentrated wasabi, it really a little bit goes a long way. So these are tube watercolors that are poured out onto a palette. And then I also have this fun palette, which seems more familiar. People are usually used to cakes or pan watercolors. So I use them interchangeably. I love them. I wanted to bring both in case someone had questions about how do I wake up the cakes, right? It's very similar. If you look at it as that really concentrated, saturated wasabi, you're going to be just set. So I get a lot of water on here. I mix up. This is one of my favorite little mixtures. In the beginning of the book, we have time to practice all the foundational skills. And one of the reasons I love watercolor is because once you understand the foundational skills, much like learning a language, you understand the structure of the letter, how the letters work together, all those things, then all of a sudden you're able to write a sentence. It's very much like that in watercolor. Once you learn those foundational skills, like making a wash, you repeat in different combinations, and suddenly you have a piece put together. So in the beginning of the book, I talk about all the different foundational skills, and then we even practice mixing all of these different colors, and I call them color recipes, which no big surprise there, because once again, my food analogies. I like this idea that we can combine different things and make something beautiful. So we can start with just a plain wash. Let's see, I want to make sure we're good on screen. Okay. So just for a normal wash, we're going to make sure we've got this movement and shine. We've got soy sauce with a touch of wasabi on our palette. Another really great way to test and see if you've got the right consistency is by tipping your palette. And we're all familiar with raindrops on our windshields. And that's very much what kind of watery consistency you want when you begin a wash. So I just use a round 4. I love these brushes because of the versatility. You can easily go from a really thin point to maybe where you want to get the details in the jagged parts of a leaf to more of a thicker stroke where you can fill the entire little boundary here. All right. And so the idea is to transfer this beautiful movement and shine from your palette onto your book or your piece of paper so that you have time to make changes. Watercolor is a bit of a dance. I've learned that I am merely one of the instruments as this piece is taking place. I can suggest, hey, maybe a little bit of a wet and wet yellow ochre would be really pretty here. But then it's also my job to let the other players have a part in this beautiful dance. If I fuss with it too much, which is very tempting for watercolor because we all like to help it along, right? If I fuss too much, oftentimes I end up undoing some of the beautiful work that watercolor is known for. It's that beautiful moving and shining. I'll dab in a little bit of red, this alizarin crimson. And if we fuss too much, then we learn that oftentimes the beautiful marks that watercolor was going to make or do gets interrupted by our help. So you make a few marks, and then, like any good experiment, you have to step away and let the work kind of work itself out. The water is evaporating, it's drawing the paint out across the page, and watercolor is changing continually until it's completely dry, which is really fun because one, it reminds us that we are not in control, which is always a good reminder. But it also does really beautiful things. And if you, watercolor can kind of feel unruly, especially if you're painting really large landscapes and a lot of things are wet at the same time, and then paint goes a different way and you're not quite sure what to do with it. If you start painting in smaller boundaries, like these leaf shapes, it's really nice to be able to control it because you start to learn that, you start to learn the dance moves, right? So we're gonna do a wet wash here. So just like that green wash, just gonna add a little bit of water here. It's the same analogy, it's just straight soy sauce now though. And then I'm gonna go ahead and dab in burnt sienna. I'm learning that burnt sienna is almost in every palette that I put together, and I just think it's so beautiful. You guys, I'm very informal, so if you have questions, please. Gabby, do you use a lot of watercolor when you?
Yeah, I do, and the burnt sienna is also one of my favorite colors.
It is? I love that.
Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, because you can make all the great, nice Seattle gray colors that we get here, right?
Absolutely can.
How do you know when to stop fussing with it?
That's a question of the ages, right? It's learned. So I often tell my students, because they'll say, how do I know when it's done? Or when I need to stop and walk away. And usually if you have to ask, you're coming up for breath, that usually means you should pause and step away. Now, that doesn't mean I don't go back and kind of like help it along and when it fusses and when I have to fuss a little bit. So like this is still wet, and based on the experiments that I've done on this paper, and you can think and research, right, up into a point, but just like with, sketchbook or drawing, there's nothing like actually just diving in and starting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my roundabout answer of saying depends.
I find with my own watercolors and when I took workshops that with the students, it's easy to get frustrated with watercolor because, for one thing, the way the color looks on your palette and the way it dries often are very different. It dries much lighter,
Mm-hmm.
and then that creates a little bit of
A little frustration.
yeah, it's like it was really dark and blue here, and look at this, it's so completely bland and boring, right?
Yeah.
How do you go about that? Do you have any tips on how to nail the tonal value of the color?
Yeah, absolutely. I think watercolor is kind of one of those misunderstood mediums where it needs multiple layers in order to look finished or vibrant enough that it's attractive. So I feel like people will try a lesson and they'll be like, well, why is your icon so much brighter than my watercolor? And part of it is, well, sometimes printing, you get a little bit more ink deposit. So, but the other answer is truly watercolor takes many layers. It's a transparent medium. So one layer, like you may lay down for markers or oils or acrylic, it's not enough. You have to keep returning, and it's that layering of one transparent layer of color on top of another, and it's that interaction between the multiple layers that really gives you that richness in color. And it's often hard to look at a piece and go, what did you do there? Because there are so many multiple layers, right? So that's usually how I suggest people go a little bit more vibrant. Like these leaves that I painted, these are 3 layers. That's a 3rd layer. This is 2 layers. You can see this first layer is on its way to dry. We've got a nice like raindrop forming here. But they will need another layer of color once they dry, like, because you said they always dry a little bit lighter. So like 10 to 20% lighter. And it is frustrating because you get that really rich ultramarine blue and then you're like, and it's faded.
Yeah.
So it's just that returning, coming back and not giving up, I think.
Do you re-wet with clear water sometimes as opposed to doing a second wash that already has pigment?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I do both. So this one, let's do a clear. So I'll often add a clear water layer on top of a work when I've got hard drying lines and I've got a boundary that I can kind of control. Like let's say, let's fix a watercolor, because I feel like that's often where people are like, I don't know how to fix it, right? If I made a mistake or I want to increase the color or I want to change something, with acrylic or oil, you just layer over it, right? But with watercolor, because it's transparent, you have to do a little bit more work. So the reason this technique works is because I'm working inside one leaf boundary. So whenever you re-wet watercolor like this with a clear wash, you're going to get hard drying lines wherever that new layer dries, all right? So you have to be pretty sure that wherever you're putting your brush for this clear wash, you're willing to let these edges dry independently of the colors that are beneath it. All right, so I'm just using, I call this sweeping with my brush. So it's really just kind of this lifting slowly. A paper towel is your friend with watercolor, but sometimes I've learned with students, I actually don't like to give out paper towels because they start to doubt themselves and then pull up all the work that they did. And if they just left it for 10 minutes, it would have been perfect. But we just doubt ourselves, especially when it's a new medium or an art form. And so we fuss and second guess. But a paper towel for if you wanted to lift, because there was some hard drying lines there. And maybe let's say I did that green leaf vein down the center and I didn't like it. That's usually when I will add another clear wash layer on top. There's also times when I'll add a clear wash layer and create kind of a new boundary within, or so now I've got a new clear wash layer. I've lifted off the green with my paper towel, and then I added another clear wash, and now I can build yet another layer of color. And I'm one of the reasons I wanted to make this book was, again, to make it approachable and this fun kind of workbook activity where people could sit down and mindlessly feel that joy of watercolor. But part of that, the enjoyment of watercolor really comes from the quality of the material. And this paper was very difficult to find because from my publisher's point of view, they wanted a piece of paper that would shelve and that wasn't, because bindings tend to break at that point and then the watercolor workbook falls apart and everybody's bummed. But I was like, I need water and paint to move and shine on the surface of this paper. If watercolor paper, if it's not good quality, it's not an enjoyable process. You're fighting it the entire time. And if you've ever worked with like a student grade and then moved to a professional watercolor paper, that shock of like, oh, I'm actually pretty decent. This is awesome. Like if you ever need kind of that bump in your, skill level, don't be afraid to try that nice 100% cotton paper because it really is a confidence booster. And it's just so much more enjoyable. And that's with this paper. So it's wood-free paper. And that was really important for me. It's not 100% cotton because frankly, the book would skyrocket out of anyone's price range. So we had to find this happy medium of paper that would move and shine, that would take scrubbing. Because like I just did, I just lifted off that layer, I scrubbed it off, and then I'm adding enough. And then oftentimes you want to create points of highlight, which involves that scrubbing again. It's that side swiping of color away, and you're creating points of light. So yeah.
Sarah, I've seen that you're staying very nicely within the lines. Is it okay to break out the lines a little bit?
100%. Absolutely.
Because for some people that may feel a little restrictive. Right?
Yes. Okay, so this will be really interesting what you think about this. So I actually prefer painting outside the lines. I was watching John Singer Sargent is one of my absolute favorite artists of all time, and his watercolors are fantastic. And then when I heard that he also was okay using white in his watercolors, I liked him even more because he was willing to break the rules. But he was talking. I was watching this cool documentary where they were talking about how he liked to paint outside the lines, and so he painted outside of the jurisdictions of his time and what was prescribed for artists, but then also he didn't follow all of the techniques that were what fine artists did. People would block everything out in pencil and then paint by chunks in the lines. And he and Velasquez, Monet experimented with this for a while. I didn't realize he took classes with Monet. Like, he was one of Monet's friends. But they learned to paint tone and light instead of painting actual in the lines. And for me, that was fascinating because it's a study of color. So yes, so I brought my sketchbooks just so that you guys could see I do paint outside the lines a lot. I prefer it. But I also like that fine line because there's this interesting dynamic between what is a craftsman and what is an artist. And I think we're both. But for me, so I've been reading Rick Rubin's book, A Creative Act. Fantastic book. But he posed this question, and as I create these books, often I feel more like a craftsman than an artist because I'm reverse engineering the project so that someone feels successful at the end, so they have the bones of the art. Where when I'm just being Sarah and arting, as my daughters call it, I don't paint in any lines. I like to break the rules. I like to, this was my sketchbook from this last summer. I like to just play and kind of go wild.
Experiment.
Yeah.
And that's
exactly.
what a sketchbook is for, too, right?
Right, and somehow sketchbooks kind of remove that fear of going outside the lines. It's like you can experiment and play a little bit more.
Yeah, sketchbooks are a funny thing because they're like a paradox. You open the sketchbook and you want every page to be perfect,
Yes.
but
then it's not a
but
sketchbook.
then they tell you, no, it's about experimenting, it's about doing different things. So it's like, what is it?
You almost need like a scratch sketchbook to try out your ideas.
Yeah.
And then a pretty one.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell people. If you want to have your bad sketchbook, just go train, and then your portfolio sketchbook.
Yeah.
To show people, do
Yeah,
that.
and do it side by side, right?
It's
I find, so when I am not worried about perfection and like getting my sketchbook really pretty, I sometimes like my marks more. I feel like they're more gestural and in the moment.
more authentic. If you want.
Authentic. Yeah, that's the word for it. And I just, sketchbooking is like one of my favorites. I learned that some of my figure drawings, I actually really like the sketching with just my paintbrush or with just going right to it and not drawing lines. Right? And that feels more authentic. And just you make more mistakes, but maybe you can resonate with this. But when I paint anything nature related botanically, I feel like the wonkier the better because it actually looks more authentic. Like not many of us are very symmetrical and every leaf is in its perfect shape. And so actually when your flower petal is wrong, it's wonky and I think it looks more real later on. Like you might go, oh, that's not exactly what I'm seeing, but it caught the essence of the flower better.
Exactly. I think we run the risk of trying to do scientific illustrations, and those may be very accurate, but they may come across as lifeless.
Yes, flat.
Or flat, and sometimes you can be less accurate, just get more expressive and unique and capture the essence of that botanical.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about botanicals, I want to make sure I ask you this question before we run out of time. You're the mean gardener. What was first, the gardening or the art?
Oh, that's a good question.
And do you paint every plant in your garden?
Oh, that's good. I don't paint every plant in my garden. Okay, I've tried, but dahlias continue to elude me. I will return to them. certain flowers that I return to every year, kind of as this meditative act. And it's a really good marker as an artist to say, I'm going to paint pansies every year when they're in bloom here. And you learn that all year long you were doing exercises and painting other things, and you were actually getting better. And that progress is able to be marked when you paint the same thing again, and you have a new skill set, extra muscles, you're stronger, right? They get better. So yeah, so I'll keep returning to those dahlias, but those are my challenge. The Mint Gardener, my Instagram actually started in 2014, and we had just moved into our house in North Seattle, and we have a quarter of an acre, which was, unheard of. It was amazing. We have a greenhouse. It's so beautiful. We love it. And it was kind of this place where my husband and I could combine our love of plants. So I've always created. Actually, I have really early memories of sitting as a kid in my room drawing Betty and Veronica. For like the Archie comics. I just loved them. My parents would always get them in the checkout line. So I've been drawing my whole life, but truly sitting and painting came when I actually broke my foot and sprained my ankle on I was in Key West wearing flip-flops of all things, and did all that with flip-flops, which was quite impressive. It was obviously time to slow down and paint. But I was an econ major, put art away because I couldn't make any money, so I deemed it unworthy. And I know that killed me. Trust me, that one hurt for a while. So inside, it was like, oh, I really want to create, but it was kind of just this, I don't know when, I don't know how, it's too much. So breaking my foot and spraining my ankle slowed me down. And my husband, then my fiance, would go to all the Husky games every weekend, and I was in a boot with crutches, and I'm like, I'm not doing the stadium. That's not happening. So my very best friend was a fine art major at the U, and she's like, that's it, you're painting, Sarah. And so she encouraged me, and she took me to A&C actually down the street, and crutched behind her, and she got on my supplies, and it was wonderful. And that was my first kind of return to painting, and that was in 2011. And then we moved to that house, got married, had babies, and all the things. And I wanted to start selling my art because my husband recognized in me that was something that I really loved. And unless you carve out time for creativity, it never finds a way into your schedule. You have to be so intentional with it. And so it got to the point where I had an IKEA rolling cart, because then I could roll it in the closet in case anybody came, so I could hide it, because a lot of crap was being created. And I was embarrassed. But I had it, and so I would roll it out, and I'd have my paintbrushes there, I'd have my paints, and then eventually I got into my great-grandmother's writing desk, and it was this beautiful setting. But it was always something that was like an intentional, I'd sit down and do it. But my Instagram started, the Mint Gardener, it was a bit of a joke. Because if you garden, you know that you don't garden mint, mint gardens you, right? Forever. And that was why I wanted to name that for my art. Because I did not want my art to ever be put away again. I wanted my art to thrive in the sun and the shine, the sun, the shade, and all of the things. I wanted it to take over. And then it did.
Right. Thanks for sharing that story. That's wonderful. And then you started. And I want to ask you this: what tips do you have for people who are starting with watercolor? I mean, this is a wonderful book with all the exercises and the drawings. Mm-hmm. But there's another step in drawing, as you know, which is drawing from observation and from life.
Yes.
So, what tips do you have for that? Like, for people who are here who want to draw the plants in their garden, how do you do that at home? Do you sit next to the garden? Do you grab the flowers, cut them, and put them in a vase? Talk about a little bit about how to go from here to the next step.
Yeah. So that's that's the dreamiest thing. I think that's what people think I do every day. I just, ferry through my garden, and it's all manicured and beautiful, and I just pluck a few and then come in, and the reality is much grittier, but that's usually my favorite. This spread was actually painted My husband loves to go on R&B trips, and so as a labor of love, I go but I bring my sketchbook, and so it's this wonderful opportunity, usually where there's no Wi-Fi, which first gives me anxiety, and then I work through it, and then I have no distractions, and so I can actually fill a sketchbook, which is so fun. So I think the process is very much like gather something, make time for it, do it. Drawing is one of those things. So this would be an interesting question for you because you draw all the time. Putting it right back on you. There is a big debate in the art community about tracing versus freehand drawing. Okay, so this book essentially is filled with drawings that you can trace and hone that, hand-eye coordination. Right? And that's what I do in my flower painting club. I have a group, really fabulous group of people all over the world. I give them a bunch of different topics. They vote, I draw it, they trace it, and then I tell them how to paint it. And all of them, most of them that I talk to say how that really helps them with their hand-eye coordination. It helps them start to approach drawing and not feel quite so scared of it, is because the tracing is kind of like, again, like training wheels, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that allowed? Is that okay?
I don't believe in hard and fast rules for art. It's whatever works for people. And like drawing from photos, tracing, anything that gets you making marks is good.
Okay.
As long as you keep challenging yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
How do you trace onto watercolor paper?
Oh yeah. So you get really strong triceps. That's what you learn. So I print off just computer paper of a drawing, and when I draw it for people, I use like a really thick line in Procreate so that they can see it. There's also light boards so that you don't have to kill your arms, right? So I print it off, and then you turn that light board all the way up where you wait for a sunny day, and then that's how you trace right onto watercolor paper. And some people feel more comfortable doing pencil first and then going to ink. In my newest, I'm working on the next watercolor workbook. I was actually painting today. I was telling the ladies up here, it was really nice. And I did a lot of paintings that actually I'm not encouraging people to draw ahead of time in the book. Like the drawings are going to be there and they're going to be faint, but it's an invitation to paint first. But yeah, so I trace right onto watercolor paper. Yeah, and it's sometimes hard to see, but a good light board, usually you can see it. And some printers print. The window's great. Yeah.
The window,
You got. I'm always like aching halfway through. But yeah, drawing from photos. That's one of. I have too many photos on my phone. But I have like albums, different flowers I want to come to, inspiration.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when you're out in the field, I'm sure you experience. You're like, I want to draw this, but I have to get on my bus, right? So it's like I'm going to take a million photos of every angle, and then I can draw it.
Yeah. I just want to go back to the tracing. Another old-fashioned technique is you take your sheet of paper, you put graphite or charcoal on one side, and then you just press. You press, and then you will transfer on the other
Yes.
side.
Yes, the graphite.
Not super accurate, but it will give you enough of a framework.
Yeah.
So I do, of course, I'm all about, from the urban sketching community and my own teaching, I'm all about drawing from life.
Yeah.
Drawing your city, drawing what you see. But I know it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I always want to tell people is that, like I have a pet peeve about telling people, no, you should draw directly in ink because it frees you. No, it doesn't. Like if once you put a line in ink, you cannot take it back.
Yeah.
So it's okay. You can do light pencil, but there's a lot of. And my theory is that it's okay to block some shapes, with pencil, especially if you do a hard lead like an H2 pencil. You don't even have to erase the lead because it's just so thin. I think drawing from photos and drawing, as long as you don't disregard the drawing from observation and you continue training your eye, that's good. All these drawings are fantastic. So I was also going to ask you, how did you come up for the inspiration for the drawings? You said your community tells you like, oh, let's do this? Or
Yeah, well, usually a book starts to take formation based on like I talk to people. So this flower painting club is fantastic, and they're kind of like, I really like that thing. He's actually right from our garden. I looked out my window and I was like, he is so cute, and his paint was starting to chip.
Yeah.
So part of the things that I draw, it's because they have such a short lifespan. I think that's why I love drawing botanicals, is because it's a way to commemorate just that shape, and it'll never be the same again. And so same with gnomes, that idea. But okay, with drawing, so I know that people want to learn to draw and want to spend more time on it. So people that do this book or that are in my flower painting club, they're like, how do I press myself for drawing? Like, what are the next, how am I continually challenging myself? Because yeah, you can trace all day, but unless you push yourself to that next level and do it, So what do you think contour drawing? I like continuous line drawing.
So drawing is good, contour drawing is good. I say start small, start with objects.
Yeah.
Like the garden gnomes, here is a perfect example, because when you're drawing an object like this, and then like the exercise that I show is, you can even put a vertical frame in front of this, because you're drawing, you're actually tracing on top of the glass, like actually.
Good catch.
Like let's say this is glass, right? So if I put it here, I can trace on top of the glass as if I was drawing it, and just always remember to close one eye because that flattens the image.
Right.
So just start with little, and then you start like identifying, the distance from here to here is this, and then that, and that kind of starts turning your eye.
That's a good idea.
So there's all sorts of little objects at home that you can set up for yourself to get the eye coordination.
Yeah.
And then that I see the difference when people go urban sketching, we go into sketchbooks. You can tell that people who have some drawing practice, even if it's not out on the street, versus the people who are completely beginners.
Yes.
And like you, I was drawing the cartoons when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So
well, drawing it's just like any learned skill. Anything that's worth spending time on, it takes a while, right? There's no magic pill. So I feel like, during the pandemic, teaching my daughter to read, I was like, this is tough. Thankfully, the grandmas came in to help, because working and doing that was rough. But just watching that struggle and that frustration, and I think it's like staying in that mindset of the lifelong learner, which you guys are all already doing that since you're showing up at a bookstore on a Tuesday night. So lifelong learning, but that idea that you can continue to challenge yourself to do hard things, and staying in that mindset of like, this is a little frustrating, but that means I'm growing. Rather than, it's okay, you guys. You should hear how loud my. But yeah, no, I think that drawing is one of those things where just doodle everywhere in everything.
It's about enjoying the process.
Yeah.
And not worrying about the result. I know
Yes.
it's easier said than done, but.
Yes, but I learned that's a brain thing. So I was learning this yesterday. It was really interesting. So we all know left brain, right brain. So I'm left-handed, so I can. Right brain, right? So your right brain is the art brain. It's the one that you're more worried about. You're enjoying the journey, and you're less worried about results. Our left brain is what we're trained in our society, like, right? It's the linear thinking, it's the logical, analytical. It's this is where I want to go. This is step 1, 2, 3 to do it. So that's what this book was very interesting, because in many ways I had to engineer it towards a left brain, since that's how we all learn and we are moving forward. But then I want you to access that right brain when you start to see the colors like move and shine. And so it's this balance in art, right? And so I think we enjoy the process of drawing more when we're letting go and we're in our right brain. And so we need to not worry necessarily about the results. The check mark for your left brain to show up to draw is, I did it today.
Right.
It's not, I did something beautiful. It's, I did it.
And you have, what I love about the book is that at the end of the day, you have a page that you've painted. It's so you can see the result.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's very good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do you have going back to the watercolor, some big no-nos about water, the extra dollars or whatever it is in getting good paper because it would make a good difference.
Yeah.
The cheap travel watercolor set with the hard pen,
I know the circles. Yeah,
Yeah.
that we all used in kindergarten.
just
Don't
just
do it.
don't do it. I think it's a good investment to get yourself good tube watercolors, right?
Yeah.
And good paper.
Yeah.
So are there things that just off the bat you would say people like don't do, or things that you encourage people to do, put at the top of the list if they wanna
Yeah.
get better at
That's a
watercolor?
good question. Yeah, and then you answer your question. So I use student grade Princeton brushes. These are Select Artist Series. They're very inexpensive, but I don't need to buy a brush that's like super, super expensive in order to enjoy the process.
Yeah, brushes actually, I almost put them in a different category. I also
Okay.
use the cheap ones.
Okay, yeah, because you go through them so much.
Yeah.
My big no-no though is this is what I see at all my classes, and I'm like, because the bristles start to just go so wonky. So that's one thing you can do to preserve the life, even if your brush is
Keep
$5.
it flat.
Keep them flat.
Good tip.
I still will use student grade paper only because I love that feeling of going to the nice paper. And I have stacks of student grade paper, so we're gonna use it up. And I also did the kind of shock and awe, like we practiced some things on student grade and then you move to my book and everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm amazing. So these are handmade paints from this new maker that I just flew to me. They're from Saskatchewan, Canada, and they're beautiful. So I have found that branching out and like trying different brands of paints and everything is really exciting. And I mean, it starts to get a little addictive. So I don't know. Those are kind of some of my, and really with art, I think I really love the idea that there aren't too many rules.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, it feels more freeing. And I know you need to learn how to do it and you need the structure, right? You need enough left brain in order to understand the processes, but then you have to not limit yourself with too many rules, right? Because then otherwise you can't play.
Right.
And the playing that's the whole joy of it.
Okay. There are more questions.
Yes,
so-
yes, yes. What was your question?
Well, I just wanted to give a shout out to your books because I can kind of draw, but it takes me forever. So I don't want to draw, I want to paint.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
So thank you.
Oh, you're so
because
welcome. Thank you
it's
for that.
just Such a delight because then I can get to the learning how to work the watercolor.
Good. I'm so glad. Yeah, sitting down to draw something takes a lot of energy. And then when you get it on the paper, you're like, and then I'm going to ruin it when I try to paint it, right? I spent 6 hours getting this image out, and then what if I use the wrong color? So that's why this book was so cool, and it's been so amazing to watch people use it as a part of their process because they can really, they can enjoy the mindfulness of watercolor, right? When you focus on these skills, your brain can no longer do the worry, anxiety, monkey brain because it is so focused on the next task. And it's slow, so you're using your hands. That's slow art. It's a very calming, relaxing thing where I don't always feel drawing is that way. It can become that way. But I do feel like that. And then also how nice that you can practice all your watercolors on and that skill set on someone else's art and then go ahead and create your own to express your own colors and you can discover all the different color recipes. So good, thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Glad.
We have time for just about one more.
Oh my goodness. All right. Any more questions? And we also have a giveaway, so that's really fun. Yeah.
If nobody has.
Sorry, quick question. Do you ever use a blow dryer to speed up?
Oh, I love it. Okay, so I'm not opposed to the blow dryer. However, so watercolor does take a little bit to dry. Like, yeah, see that one didn't dry and I put my book on it. There it is. But now you guys know how to rub it out and redo another layer, right? But that's exactly why people usually use a blow dryer because it's a patience level. So what I like to do is I worked on 2 to 3 pieces at the same time and I just put them aside. It forces me to pause to decide my next color. And I also think that when you interrupt the drying process, it's kind of like coming in at intermission and telling everybody the end. It's like you gotta let the blow dryer, it evaporates things quicker than maybe the paper and the water and the paint want it to. And they didn't get a chance to fully respond. So I don't use a blow dryer. I rotate. But yes, what were your question?
I guess my question was, in the first book, I don't see any faces.
Florence, yeah. That was actually my first character that I created when it was how I first started watercolor, because I was scared of it.
Yeah.
And I painted these eucalyptus leaves, and then I'm like, great, I've got some leaves. I needed something to give it form. And so I drew a person holding the eucalyptus leaves. And then I drew her holding a frying pan with an egg in it. And then I drew her with my chicken, Daffodil. And quickly and they were quick. They were like small pieces, and I could knock them out really quick, but she was always covering her face. So one day I did draw her face, and I didn't feel like she was versatile. I felt like, oh, I made her into someone specific. And so then I was like, no, this is Florence. Her name is Florence, and she's always trying a new fascination. So she always has something different in front of her face. So yeah, in the book you see Florence, and I there's a lot of new Florence in the other book. Yeah.
I like that you
Yeah.
named her.
Well, she was definitely someone, but the moment I gave her a face and hair, and she became too specific. And I love when people would say, especially in the early days of my Instagram, like, oh my gosh, this is my sister, or this is me. And that was such a gift to hear that my art resonated with someone. So by leaving off her face, it was able to include like every person. So
Interesting.
everyone thinks I'm her though. Everyone's like, are you Florence? And I was like, oh, now I am. She can be my alter ego. Okay, are we at time?
I do have one more question.
Yeah.
Is it- Anybody else has more questions?
Yeah.
I have to ask you, what's your favorite color recipe?
Oh, that's good. Favorite color recipe? Well, probably it's like asking my favorite flower. Depends on the day. But today,
I was gonna ask you for your favorite flower too.
I think my favorite color, one of them is this pale rose blush. It's this color.
Pale rose
That
blush.
and then Payne's Gray. Those two, I love burnt sand in all my mixes too. So it's like, ooh, I have a really hard time picking favorite. But this pale rose blush, it's actually a gouache, but I discovered watercolor through gouache. Actually, I went from acrylic to gouache to watercolor. That's another story. So, but yeah, so that color. What's yours?
Oh, my favorite color
Color.
recipe?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm not as versed in color as you are. I do like the bronzing and ultramarine look, because the grays, the range of warm and cool grays you get are just fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
I like that. Cool.
I wish we could geek out about what.
I know.
You have to blow these events longer.
Okay. Well, if there's not any more questions, I'll hand the floor back to Maya. Yes. Yes.
All right, let's give her a hand.
Thank you all for coming. This was so lovely.